You are watching a video in the Woodlawn series. We sat down with a number of individuals who either worked in, lived in, or invested in the Woodlawn neighborhood. From those conversations, we hope to learn from and learn about Woodlawn.
Welcome. My name is David Helm, and I'm the senior pastor of Christ Church, Chicago. We have recently purchased the building of what was historically St. John the Baptist Temple on the northwest corner of 62nd and Woodlawn. We are looking forward to renovating that historical space and being in there by the fall of 2021. You can learn more about us by simply going to christchicago.org. Well, welcome back to another episode of what we're just calling Woodlawn, learning from and learning about. And today we have the special privilege of speaking with Laura Lane, and I've been looking forward to this. Laura actually was born on Chicago's South Side. She has a wonderful family history with the neighborhood of Woodlawn in particular. She went to the University of Northwestern University for law school. Prior to that, she graduated from, was it Lindbergh Tech?
Lindblom.
Lindblom Tech. And she presently works for Sunshine Enterprises, but her history, even prior to that, goes back to development organization and human services in Woodlawn. So this should be a wide-ranging conversation. Laura, welcome to Woodlawn, learning from and learning about.
Thank you, Pastor.
Tell us a little bit about just growing up and some of the factors that influenced your life direction and the kinds of things that you've been engaged in.
Sure. So I grew up in living in South Shore, but celebrating the holidays in Woodlawn. So my grandparents and my parents, my mother moved back to Woodlawn in 1959. My grandfather was a Tuskegee Airman, and he was a scientist, and he studied zoology at the University of Chicago, and attempted to get his PhD, but came this close and was in disputes with his, dissertation supervisor, and had a hard time finding college employment and teaching employment here. So he moved to Clark, Atlanta, and then was able to come back to Chicago in 1959 to become one of the first tenured Black professors in the city colleges of Chicago. So
wow, that's a great
1959, we've been planted in this building in Woodlawn.
Amazing.
So that's one of the reasons why it was easy for me to rededicate a big chunk of my professional life to Woodlawn. When I started grad school, I actually moved back into this building, in part to be close to family, in part to save on expenses while I was in law school. Not to live on campus, and stay connected with my grandparents, who were very influential as we grew up. And my parents are both really hardworking folks, but the person who pushed me most academically was my grandfather. He wanted to be at all of my graduations and couldn't be at my undergraduate graduation because of the unveiling of the Tuskegee Airman statue, but said, "Oh, you'll have another graduation." And he did make it to my grad school graduation.
What a rich history. And as a result, you have in your own heritage then decades of experiential knowledge on the South Side of Chicago, the factors that have influenced her direction. Just how have you seen the South Side of Chicago, and maybe more particularly, if you'd like to speak to it, in Woodlawn in particular, what have been some of the directional forces that you've kind of seen waves or movements over the last 4 or 5 decades?
Yeah. One of the interesting things about Woodlawn is its geography. So we're a little landlocked, right? On one side, we've got the cemetery.
Right, 67th.
Yeah, on one side we have the cemetery, and then we have the lake on the east. And then King Drive and and the parkland in Washington Park is sort of another landlocked, and then the University of Chicago sort of serves as another boundary. So it's a very interesting place in that we are really well situated in terms of location, but we're also a little bit landlocked. And
Right.
so some of the natural transportation and walkability is just a little bit different for the residents of Woodlawn. And part of that geography was attractive to the university many years ago, where they were just trying to expand southward. And of course, one of my mentors, two of my mentors, Bishop Brazier and Leon Finney, um, both became part of the Saul Alinsky organizing effort, Industrial Areas Foundation, one of the first organizations established under that. And so I'm trained by Industrial Areas Foundation too. I'm a trained community organizer. And so that history of community organizing, that history of sort of tensions between large institutions and community efforts and community organizing and will has played a really large part in the history of Woodlawn in terms of how we develop younger leaders. It took a long time to develop that next round of leadership in Woodlawn, and was still even very difficult for that to sort of break out because we had some heavy hitters. We had the presence of the university, Apostolic Church of God, 20,000 members. The Woodlawn organization had such a large legacy and foothold. Maddie Butler and WeCan had a big presence. WeCan was born out of some of the landlord fires that killed people decades ago. And so we've had that heavy hitter layer of leadership, and we weren't developing other institutions and other leaders coming through. So it's been a really interesting journey that we've been upon. And for a while, there was sort of this tacit understanding that the university just would not develop past 61st Street. And then when Bishop Brazier was transitioning the church to his son, Dr. Byron Brazier, there was an agreement struck that there was, some opening happening there. In part because of not only the university taking a different position on how to do more community facing and community invested development, in part through partnership with organizations like WPIC and the fund, which I serve as executive director for, but also because I think the community institutions got a little bit smarter about how they thought about development as well. You can't do development in the shadow of a university that has 20, 25-year plans unless you're working on a 20, 25-year plan as well, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. If I could just say there. So the history, as I understand it, and you experientially much more so, it seems that the university as a dominant player has been the economic engine, but also as I like to say, the 800-pound gorilla, and that over the last 4 decades, things seem to have worked well for the university and for Apostolic, which is the other collaborator with the university. But how do those two major players feed into the kind of thing that you're talking about in regard to others who wonder, well, what's the actual plan beyond those two great institutions?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that it's just those two players. There have been a lot of players. So, like, I'm with Sunshine Enterprises now, and that was born out of Sunshine Gospel Ministry, which moved to Woodlawn in the early 2000s. And there are lots of other leaders and institutional players. And if Bishop Brazier were still here, he would not say that Apostolic played the role. He really believed his public ministry was external to the church, even though those of us who engaged with Bishop Brazier understood a lot of his power to come from the base of the church. He saw it very differently. And I think Dr. Byron Brazier sees the two much more integrated. But when I interviewed Bishop about that very topic, about sort of the public-private relationships there, he
Right.
saw the external ministry that I worked with him on, WPIC Woodlawn Preservation Investment Corporation, and the Fund for Community Revitalization, as external to the church, and
Yeah.
his civic engagement external. And so, um, and it sometimes was a collaboration, not always.
Yeah.
So there are plenty of times when the university has taken good steps to support development in the community, and then there's times when it's taken steps to try to control it or shape it,
Right.
and not always in a collaborative fashion. So there's lots of waves and bumps down that history. And I think,
What's your assessment just of the present collaboration between the city itself in regard to all the land that's available for development, the university itself, and all of the organizations going on Woodlawn? What's your present assessment of the positive engagement between all those entities, or the ability to collaborate in a way that you think will be very healthy between the Midway and 67th?
well, there's some positive steps, in as much as there is a focus on Woodlawn. The network of Woodlawn that's grown out of the New Communities program that we helped to pilot in 2001 and then launched to 16 communities was a good base, plan for the community. And the network of Woodlawn and sort of their NCP 2.0 has built on that mightily. The city, in the presentations that I've attended, is attempting to leverage that data. Um, they're not being as inclusive, and setting the table to really make things work. And one of the things I think we learned from the New Communities process is that the whole concept of sort of a one table, a one Woodlawn, is a good one, because for the particular political dynamics we had here in Woodlawn, we couldn't operate our New Communities program the way they did in the other 15 communities, because we literally had 800-pound gorillas. And we had to set a table that was more of an MOU, more of a collaborative, some sort of guidelines. And I think
So,
that,
so,
go
so
ahead.
I was just going to say, so back up, because a number of the folks that are listening to you on the New Communities won't be as familiar. So your own engagement in that, the initiation of that,
Yeah,
and the outcome of that you're hitting on, but it might be good for some people to hear how you actually initiated and made that movement for
sure.
us.
So back in the early 2000s, Leadership Greater Chicago and other folks held a series of discussions about where we were going with community development, because several well-respected community development corporations were folding and weren't being successful. So they really did an assessment of like, what's happening, how do we turn the tide? And one of the new ideas that came out of that was this idea of New Communities Initiative. And so LISC Chicago piloted the New Communities Initiative, and for communities, Woodlawn was one of them. Um, our particular pilot failed miserably. I'm not sure of all the reasons why, but we were part of the next round of 16 communities that were given some resources. So a couple of premises behind the New Communities program is we were given professional facilitators who understood economic development to help develop a community-based plan. Um, the For our plan, we interviewed about 300 residents. I was one of those residents, along with my daughter in her Girl Scout uniform. We would attend the meetings, and I was interviewed by the organizer at the time, Karen King, to help come up with the different elements of the plan. And so the goal is a community-driven plan, um, leveraging the assets of the community. So a very much asset-based community development approach out of John McKnight's work, right? And then as opposed to the traditional hunt and peck for, money from the foundations that serve Chicago, there would be seed money that the New Community Program could give to efforts being led by those who already had capacity in the community. And we would get a lot of really good ideas faster to market to be able to service the need of the communities by those who were there.
Right.
And so we um, really launched our New Communities program in 2003. I think published it in 2005, and Woodlawn Preservation Investment Corporation that Bishop Brazier founded. I became the executive director in 2005, and one of my first tasks was to right the ship, make sure that our NCP is going well, and that we're actually seeding projects. And so our plan had an education arm, economic development arm, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also sort of all the sort of human services type things that we could see. And then there were larger developments that could also be seeded. So there were some developments that are already in play, and LISC traditionally was an early in investor in a lot of neighborhoods in Chicago. That was part of their role in the building marketplace. And so they were able to be a layer of financing in some of these both affordable rental housing and marketplace housing, because WPIC helped to bring back the marketplace housing in Woodlawn after 40 years of just affordable. WPIC was able to do one of the developments that really brought marketplace housing back into development back into Woodlawn. And so the New Communities program was pretty successful in being able to leverage dollars. So money follows money. So once you had that seed grant, so for example, we did a seed grant with Sunshine Gospel Ministries to help their computer training program that was training young people how to develop websites and build a business of their own. We helped to seed the farmers market at 61st Street and help them find their first market manager. And so the idea of the one table New Communities process was fairly successful, actually, in terms of the metrics that we were taking a look at. The challenge for communities like Woodlawn, and NCP tried to take care of this too, was the capacity building. You still had some capacity building that needed to be done with those organizations that were on the ground. WPIC needed some capacity building in terms of
define capacity building for us.
When you're thinking about it in terms of the nonprofit actors, it could be help. It could be a grant to help pay for the accountant to reorganize your books and get your chart of accounts straight. It could be, helping you with marketing. I mean, sort of any of the sort of health of a nonprofit types of things that oftentimes it's hard to raise money for because most funders want to seed programs and they don't want to see the back office that's required to implement them with effect. There's a little bit more understanding of that in the current funding climate, but at the time, LISC was one of the few people who were, trying to find more just general operating dollars and also very clearly technical assistance. They would pair you up with a consultant as well as some seed funds to make sure that you could get that software, get that implemented, and have the checks and balances and controls that you needed to continue to grow and do what you were called to do efficiently.
So at some point then you moved from kind of growing up in the area, involved in the church and running something there for Bishop Brazier for the community, seen some success along the way, even in regard to what you've been working on. And then you end up at Sunshine Enterprises. What brought you to Sunshine individually in regard to feeling like this is another vehicle for me to see the transformation that I've given my life to, and help just inform the watcher of this what Sunshine is if they're not familiar with it already, and your role there as the program director?
Sure. I was doing a lot of consulting with different nonprofits and really wanted to shift into a direction of doing more digital economic development. And so I knew Joe Hamonic, our executive director from back in the NCP days, had recruited him to the Network of Woodlawn board as one of the younger board members at the time. And then when I was looking to, change the position of the consulting that I was doing, I went and took the class that I supervise now, the Community Business Academy, to help me shape and hone in on who my target market was for the work that I was doing. So that was back in 2016. And then I ran into Joel a while later, and we were talking, and we were talking about he needed some more women on his board. He also needed some instructors. And I was at a place where I still wanted to give back to my community. And as I looked at the different things that I had done, where I was most engaged, where I thought it could be more effective, and I'm in a second marriage and had a young child, trying to do something that I thought was going to be family friendly, but still meaningful in terms of what I had to give and be of service. I told Joe I was really interested in the instructor role because I'd done a lot of facilitating around Green Line and around enterprise zones and that type of stuff around the community. So I'd love to do some more of that. And so I re-engaged with Sunshine as an instructor in the Community Business Academy, and then came on board full time, and can now have the muckety muck title of managing director of programs. And Sunshine Enterprises came out of work that Joel and those of us were doing and looking at workforce in Woodlawn. So, where there's an absence of work, there's a presence of violence is something that Joel says a lot from his study of the community. And so he and I were on a workforce committee together. And I remember him saying way back when that, we need more jobs here. We're just going to have to create as many of them as we can here on 61st Street. And what that led him and others at Sunshine to do is to come up with this idea of, and thinking more in an asset-based community development mindset. All these people here have gifts. The person next to me has a daycare. This woman makes and sells pies. What if we could just develop their gifts and they can create their own jobs? They can, create enterprises, and bring more money into the community and solve one aspect of the, social determinants of health that we know about. And so as they were stepping out on faith and called this entity Sunshine Enterprises, and had some idea of what they wanted to do, they met Alpha and Alex of Rising Tide Capital. They were here at a dinner, entrepreneurs talking about their work. And Joel said, "Oh my God, this is amazing. We just, stepped out on faith to create Sunshine Enterprises. You guys are doing exactly what we want to do. It's faith driven. It's similar target market. We're going to do this anyway because we've already decided to do it, but we would do it a lot better if, if you helped us."
Sure.
And Rising Tide had been recognized as a CNN hero. Barack Obama said we should have a rising tide in every city. He had lifted them up, and people around the country wanted to do them. So Joel just kept going back and forth to New Jersey, interviewing them, talking to them until they agreed to let us be the first national replication. And now there are 2 other cities that have come on board. And so we've been doing this work for almost 7 years. And at the core is a very accessible 12-week training, Community Business Academy, that helps the entrepreneur really develop their business concepts in a much, much stronger way. And it does it in a way that meets them where they are. It does it in a way that values their vision and helps them identify sort of their path. It's a very hands-on curriculum and process. And then we stay with the entrepreneur for the life of their business. We offer business coaching and additional sort of workshops in targeted areas for the life of their business. Um, and so I have the the pleasure of being able to help to grow the team that services our entrepreneurs. We have a large base here on the south side. We have a partner on the west side. We also have a hub on the north side, and we have specialty cohorts focusing on the trades, arts, and then also small property owners, because the Small Business Administration doesn't see them as business owners, but it's one of the most important wealth building opportunities in our communities.
So I'm aware of that work generally, and I'm sure that people that are watching this are glad to hear about it. Let me take you from your citywide work to Woodlawn in particular. Can you just give us an example of the portfolio of the entrepreneurial investments and some of the things you've been encouraged about as you look forward?
Oh, sure. There's we have all types of gifts here. Everything from healthcare coding companies to restaurants to fitness and wellness to really great ideas about apps that can help better the lives of folks. We have all sorts of entrepreneurs who've come through this program, and we we're there's a lot of social capital that gets built up amongst the entrepreneurs. I'll
Right.
give you an example. One of the young ladies who took the class with me, she and her then fiance were in my same cohort in 2016. They started out with one business idea and then quickly pivoted to a food-based business, really leveraging her travel and expertise. She now has 3 food-based businesses, and she had an opportunity last year to do a pop-up at the Taste of Chicago. That was the
Wow.
most successful pop-up in the whole Taste. Her name is Javon Nicholas, and this particular company of hers is Egg Rolls, etc. And when I went to the Taste to support her and take pictures, um, I saw not one, not two, but 3 other Sunshine CBA graduates working her booth to make sure she was
Wow.
successful. These are
That
people
is
who
good.
had their own food
Yeah.
businesses who were
Yeah.
working there. And not only did I see them, there was another guy in the picture. I didn't quite know who he was. Learned later, we're part of something called Next Level Exchange, where we help to pair C-suite mentors with our rising entrepreneurs. That person in the picture I didn't know was her mentor, who has his own food companies, and he was working her booth the whole day as well. So just the social capital that builds up amongst the entrepreneurs, the support for each other as they're growing their business. We try to foster that as well. We help with access to
That's
capital,
great.
obviously knowledge capital, and then the social capital is invaluable, and we're trying to create spaces every day to build more of that social capital and help
That,
to push relevant information out to our budding entrepreneurs.
that's great. Let me ask you just to make a comment on a parallel track, the social capital of the churches in Woodlawn.
Mhm.
Just, as our own church is in the midst of renovation at 62nd and Woodlawn, what's first of all, your assessment of the church relations within Woodlawn, and what are your own aspirations for how they might be engaged in a healthy way, in a parallel way with the kind of work that you've been doing all these years?
Yeah. For a while, I was at the African American Leadership Partnership, and that was in partnership with McCormick Theological Seminary. And we very intentionally organized all 40 churches in Woodlawn. And there's a lot of opportunity for the church. It depends on how the church is called. If the church is called to public ministry, there's quite a bit of work to do in Woodlawn. Um, and there's quite a bit that can be done collectively if you take the time to build the relationships between the churches and make sure that you share intelligence in terms of what can be most effective. Um, Again, thinking from an asset-based community development perspective, you have the parish of the church, right? You know what I mean? Sort of the
Right.
geography around the
Right.
church where you can have the most impact, go door to door and be of service and understand what the needs of really your sort of parish is. But there's a lot that churches can do collectively. I learned a little bit about that from the Industrial Areas Foundation and their traditional organizing, which is very church-based. We also use other methodologies like asset-based community development, like appreciative inquiry, other methodologies that help to sort of bridge the secular, with the faith work and the call of a particular ministry. So there is a lot of opportunity for not only ministry within the four walls of the churches in Woodlawn, but public ministry, especially because, and I'd like to share some slides with you in just a minute, especially because we have seen such a decimation of health and human services in Woodlawn. The TWO closed, Hull House closed. And then, with Corona, we have so much more devastation. And so we did not have enough social services and human services for the 27,000 people who sleep here, never mind those who come to work every day at the university or at the social service administration or any of the other institutions in Woodlawn. So there is a lot of opportunity there for connecting, understanding the gaps, and then also public ministry.
You mentioned slides. Is it something you're able to do? Share screen in this COVID context?
Yep, let's do that. Okay, so one of the pillars of the network of Woodlawn coming into our NCP 2.0 was the Woodlawn Health and Human Services Consortium. So as you can see, we had some population change between 2000 and 2010. And now, of course, we're going through the new census, which will be really interesting to see how the count goes with the COVID-19. But you can see that owner-occupied units in Woodlawn went up considerably. The median household income went up, but it's still pretty low, right? And then you can see the leakage in retail potential. You can see there's 21 million in food and beverage leakage, which meant that the residents of Woodlawn spent 21 million in food and beverage outside of Woodlawn. They spent 35 million in general merchandise outside of Woodlawn. Now, since this presentation was developed, we've attracted a new jewel, which we've been trying to do for some time. Our Aldi's is providing a lot more options. But you'll see that we still have some folks who are food insecure in Woodlawn. So in 2005, I talked about our new communities plan that focused on Woodlawn being a community of choice, safe streets, thriving businesses, excellent schools. And then these are some of the quality of life plan goals that focuses on the health and human services area. Professional development, to resources to health and social service agencies, improving communication and coordination amongst the institutions, plan and implement activities for youth. The network of Woodlawn had 4 pillars. This pillar did not incorporate and launch, so it's not active right now, but this data is still really relevant to what we're talking about in terms of public ministry opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So the consortium was originally put together to coordinate and convene a comprehensive strategy to address these systemic issues. And at the time that we presented this strategy to the state, the Secretary of the Department of Human Services was very interested in this strategy and was also interested in funding it with an innovation grant from the Obama Foundation. And when we changed governors, we lost the team that was putting together that strategy. So looking at a comprehensive approach to quality healthcare, increased access, educating the community, and advocating for public policy change. And you'll see some of the data as to why that's really important in Woodlawn. This is the lead agency model, and it's looking at a lot of what we learned out of the Obamacare, outcome tracking, continuous evaluation, and really looking at improved health outcomes for the residents. So all of these boxes are in a negative standpoint of Woodlawn. For each one of these health measures, Woodlawn is worse off than many other communities in Chicago. Asthma and gang violence are two of the most prevalent problems we have. Asthma is the leading cause of non-attendance in school, and homicide is the leading cause of death in young men 15 to 25. These are Woodlawn schools in relation to homicides, shootings, and gang maps. So you see 12 gang areas marked here in Woodlawn. Some of these boundaries may have changed slightly over the years. But these school buildings, I think with the exception of the Fisk school building, are still all active with students. And you see part of the challenge in why we have a safe passage program here in Woodlawn, because the kids have to cross gang boundaries to get to school. And this impacts their ability to get to youth programming on one side of Woodlawn. I hired a few young people a while back, and I had to drive one of my young people from my office at Apostolic at the time all the way back to the west side of Woodlawn, because it wasn't safe for him to travel just down any one of those streets, walking or taking public transportation. So if his mother wasn't able to pick him up, I dropped him off to make sure he was safe going home every day. Our current way of delivering health and human services is, very disjointed. All of these different agencies serve Woodlawn, or say that they serve Woodlawn. When we surveyed those entities in Woodlawn, the ones who say that they're serving, and with the Metropolitan Planning Council, the biggest barrier when working with their clients is lack of nearby providers for referrals, the client's income and affordability, insurance coverage, quality referrals, client cooperation. And client cooperation, you see, was the largest. What we were working towards was a central, customer client focused strategy with local actionable data that really would focus on the health of Woodlawn residents. We want a high quality, sustainable healthcare delivery model. We had funding for a school-linked health clinic that got pulled when the leadership at the governor's office changed, went to Rauner. We do have a Cook County clinic. We have some neighboring clinics. There are a lot of health priorities. There's some really good work being done by the Southside Health and Vitality Studies. You should take a look at their data. Dr. Stacy Lindow is the lead investigator with that study, and we've used that data to great effect with a lot of different strategies in Woodlawn. And there needs to be an evaluation of the current programs here. This was data from the Affordable Care Act. We were tracking some of the folks who were really hard to reach during the Obamacare, and this continues to be an issue. There's not as much marketing of the Affordable Care Act, and a lot of categories of Woodlawnites are not still receiving access to health care. They're off the grid, they're hard to reach. We set up offices, a mobile office. One day a week, we would be at the barbershop. One day a week, we would be at the unemployment office. One day a week, we would be where folks go to weekend to get heating and cooling and other assistance for their residents. So that if they were unphoned, they knew that they could come back that next Tuesday or that next Wednesday and still get access to services. For fitness in Woodlawn, we don't have a lot of places to go. We have some Park District facilities. We have Harris Park, we have Jackson Park, we have the Y, but many of those are not affordable for the families who are here. And I should say, I don't know if there's another slide that says this, but there are no play lots that are in West Woodlawn. There are some play lots in East Woodlawn, but they're not play lots for children to play in West Woodlawn. Food access is a big issue in Woodlawn. You can see that we have a lot of small convenience stores and some medium-sized grocery stores. This does not reflect the new jewels that we have, but these small convenience stores really prey on some of the project-based Section 8 developments we have in Woodlawn and don't serve the health needs of those folks. I think we might have a slide later. We had some University of Chicago students really assess sort of what they offer in those convenience stores and sort of why. And so this assessment by this policy team took a look at all of those places, and you can see where fresh food is most available is outside of Woodlawn. Now, with how all these have stepped up their game and Jewel being there, there's more available per se, as well as with the 61st Street Farmers Market, but it's still not affordable for many of the residents of Woodlawn. So it's a false choice for many of them if it's not affordable.
Although Aldi it's tough to get much more affordable than Aldi.
Yeah, but you'd be surprised when we talk to some of the families.
Yeah. No, I was just
I
trying to think of what would be the next step in the community to reach
more food. Right
further
now,
in.
we need more food pantries. Like right now during COVID, what we're seeing on the Sunshine Gospel side of our operations is we need a lot more food access because it's even more devastating than it was when I pulled this data together. So we have some community gardens in Woodlawn, and then we have the dining in Woodlawn. There are only, I think, 2 sit-down restaurants. Everything else is fast food. And again, it's preying upon, so there's some geography there, but you could see right along Cottage, that's focused around Grove Park. And then right along King Drive is focused on Parkway Gardens, the project-based Section 8 families there. Health services in Woodlawn are pretty disparate as well. There are not a lot of doctors here. And when we did a survey of our schools, because we had an immunization problem with the students, and looked at where they receive their health care, the way the Medicaid system takes them, it takes them all over the region. It doesn't allow them to necessarily access the closest medical care. And depending upon what that medical care is, that distance will be a barrier to access.
Right.
And so again, these are some of the goals for the human services pillar. And a lot of these are not being addressed by the current plans. We're not looking at how much square footage of health and human services we have in Woodlawn. This is something that the city is missing. This is something that the network of Woodlawn is not fully focused on right now in their plans. And these are things that still need to happen. We need public health goals. We need collaboration. We need funding to get here. This is a map of the social service agencies and some of the programmed residences. So there's some opportunities here. This map is probably diminished at this point with the funding and everybody else was pulled out. But those buildings have some sort of programming. So those could be senior homes, those could be halfway homes, other homes that are, have some sort of social service component. Schools and childcare, and public human services. One of the things that we did with Chad Broughton's team is take a look at why more folks weren't participating in early childcare. We had about 1,100 children who were eligible for Head Start and only like 130 slots in the community. There's just not enough. There's a perception that that's not effective for the families. And of course, the young people start way behind where they don't have that access to Head Start and the early child care. And there's a whole different study that Chad has done on this that I can share with you. The Department of Human Services shared data with us. The number of SNAP beneficiaries in the 60637 area code. There were 13,900 households, 26,000 individuals served, and $44 million worth of benefits, $3,200 per household annually. Cash assistance, you can see that data there. Number of home service program customers. I don't remember what DASA is, but these are some of the ways that DHS is serving the 60637 area code that the secretary presented on when she visited with us. And they have a number of providers who are servicing Woodlawn, but we're not seeing the outcomes. We're not seeing the benefits translating to the people who actually live there. That's the gap. And I think part of that gap is the way we're landlocked. It's the transportation. It's the trust. It's actionable data on the ground. We have services available in Woodlawn that aren't in high demand by the residents there, or the residents don't know the services are there. That's part of what our data also found. So there's some examples of some of the folks who are close by and some of the services that they provide.
So one of the things, Laura, that you're bringing to the fore uniquely in this conversation that I would just like to hear you comment on once here is, there has been a lot of work on the economic development side of Woodlawn, and that's going to continue. There's a huge high profile on affordable housing and the housing stock as it relates to the future. But as you rightly highlighted, the human services has kind of been left at the gate. What would you say would be the 1, 2, or 3 things that would most effectively assist in that area over the next 5 years?
We really need to, I'm going to go back to actionable data. To understand what's happening with the families on the ground and being able to get them to the services that they need. And so part of that is having local relationships, actionable relationships, and providing what those families need, not sending them. I mean, part of what we were trying to get to is the fact that we have all of these programs and no systems to serve folks. We need, the providers don't know where the clients are, the clients don't know where the providers are. And we're not able to reach them. So part of it is taking a look at the data that the Southside Health and Vitality Studies has, because they map this data every year. So there's current data that they have about what services are there. Now that they've been doing prescriptions, they have a community RX. They actually can tell you what the gaps are. So they can say that the doctor saw Melissa for diabetes. What they prescribed is they gave her 2 prescriptions for buying more healthy vegetables at the farmer's market and also going to exercise. They were able to figure out that she wasn't able to find a good place to exercise in her commute from her home to her job. And there's a gap in that service. And so the data that the Southside Health and Vitality Studies has at this point is not only what actors there are and what services are being provided, but they can actually see impact on healthcare because they have gap data over several years now. And so I would say, look at the data so that you can define the needs, look at the service providers, figure out how to connect them with those in your parish, right? And then what we were really trying to get to is have enough information about what is available in the community so that no matter what door you go in, no matter what church, no matter what institution, we all know what's happening around.
That's great. Well, this has been, for me, a wonderful conversation, and you are a wealth of experiential wisdom and knowledge. And I think you put your finger on some things that a number of those who are watching this hopefully will stimulate them to further engagement. I want to thank you for your life investment, and I want to thank you for the ways that you continue to double back with creative engagement to keep working the problem. And you seem to me very much like an individual that just says, I'm going to keep working the problem You haven't burned out on it. And we are the recipients of your work, and we thank God for you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for your interest in being of service and being reflective and intentional, because that's the type of spirit that we need, to build upon the history and the assets of Woodlawn, starting with the people first,
Right.
and then building upon their gifts from there.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This has been a great conversation with Laura Lane, and you can find her at Sunshine Enterprises. And if you don't find her there, you'll find her on the streets, making making a difference in the lives of Chicagoans. God bless you, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Pastor Helm.